What wisdom do nurses have for you? I always love to talk with nurses, doulas, and educators about their own birth stories, as they're so fortunate to see birth and learn from each experience. Think about how 100 years ago, maybe your great grandparents, all births were at home. And if imagine if you had younger siblings during those times, you would have been at those births. If you have younger cousins, your mother may have gone and brought you, and you would have been at their births. As family gathered and women offered support and comfort to each other. We are some of the first generations where the first birth most people see, including me, was my own. So there is a way to change that and return it to the way it used to be and learn about birth by attending and supporting others in pregnancy and childbirth. Learn more about becoming a doula. You can support others in your family and community and learn more about birth. So look in the show notes and you can receive our free guide to becoming a doula. My guest today has two powerful birth stories that you don't want to miss to hear how her experience of seeing birth and meeting midwives helped her shape her own preferences. Tamara will share about dealing with the unexpected in birth and how not to give birth in a car. Yes, you heard that right. Hi, I'm Deborah Pascali Bonaro, founder and director of Orgasmic Birth and host of the Orgasmic Birth podcast. I'm really honored to welcome my guest today, Tamara Walker. She is a former registered nurse who became a doula and a childbirth educator to help couples have the birth experience of their dreams. She's passionate about her husbands, kids, grandbabies, and about educating and supporting birthing people and their families. Welcome, Tamara.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, I'm really excited to have you here because I had the pleasure of reading a little bit about your background and seeing a bit about your birth. So I'd love to ask you to kind of start us off because you are a nurse, your
Mhm.
background's there, you were, working with people in childbirth. Can you tell a little bit about that and then how that prepared you for your births?
Oh, absolutely. So I started out becoming a nurse, an RN, and while I was in nursing school, I had the opportunity to we had to do a senior nursing research project, and we had to choose a non-traditional form of nursing or a form of nursing outside of just hospital nursing. For our research project. And I had the great fortune to meet some midwives who had a birthing center locally who gave me permission to come and shadow them throughout their days for a few days and be able to witness how they took care of their patients, how they served their clients, and even was able to observe some births there. And it was really an eye-opening, wonderful experience because prior to that, in nursing school, I had had the opportunity to see a birth in the hospital. But that was my only real experience with actually witnessing the full, someone giving birth. And there was such a stark contrast that I saw between the birth at the hospital that I witnessed versus how the midwives handled things at the birthing center and the environment, and everything was just much more relaxed, much more comfortable, much more um, soothing. And it felt like such a wonderful experience for the women who were able to give birth at the birthing center. So after I graduated college, when I became pregnant, I decided that was where I wanted to give birth. And I was actually a hospital nurse at the time. I was working in pediatrics. I wasn't working in labor and delivery, although every once in a while I had the opportunity to get pulled down there to help out. But most of the time I was working in pediatrics and PICU. But I wanted to give birth with the midwives that I knew at the birthing center that I had researched, and my colleagues, my nursing colleagues, my coworkers thought I was insane. They just looked at me like I had two heads when I told them I wasn't giving birth at our hospital, and they couldn't understand why on earth a nurse would choose to not give birth at the hospital that she worked at. And it just was a foreign concept to most of them. But it was very important to me to have the kind of experience that I had witnessed at the birthing center and the care that I saw the midwives giving. And it just really made me want to go in that direction and completely change the course of how I believe my births would have gone otherwise.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And, how wonderful that you had that opportunity, right? To really see. We all do, as I said
Yes.
in the beginning, we often don't get the experience to
Mhm.
see a birth at all, but then birth in different
Yes.
settings and how different they are. So take us into that first pregnancy. What was that like for you? How else did you prepare? And then tell us a little bit about that birth.
So with my first pregnancy, we were only married for 10 months when we got pregnant. And we had a plan that we were going to wait 5 to 7 years, get our careers underway because we got married a few days before our senior year of college started. So we were going to graduate college, start our careers, uh, have kids in the future. God had other plans. I'm thankful for that. I wouldn't change it, but it was difficult. And so when I found out I was pregnant, I walked around for about 3 days in complete shock because I was like, whoa, this changes everything. And this wasn't what we were planning. And I had literally just started my job at the hospital. My husband was still looking for a job at the time. And so financially, we're a young couple with nothing starting out. And it was just very stressful, but we were excited and we just figured, God's got a plan and it'll be okay. It did make it more of a challenge to be able to go with the the kind of birth situation that I wanted because insurance didn't cover our midwives and the birthing center. So we were having to pay out of pocket for that choice, whereas we could have you know, had more insurance coverage if we had given birth at a hospital. But my pregnancy care and birth experience that I wanted, we were willing to make it work. And thankfully, I have a very supportive husband who understood how important it was to me, and he was on board with it. And so we took a childbirth class through the birthing center, and that was very helpful and learned all that we could. And this was pre-internet because my oldest just turned 32. But we, just read books, tried to prepare ourselves, um, and to try to, do all that we could to have a healthy pregnancy and then a good birth experience. Now, I did have 5 months of morning sickness with that one, and that was a challenge. That was rough, but we got through it. So,
Good. And what was that birth like? Can you just give us a quick
so
kind of
just
overview?
very quickly, it was about 22 and a half, 23 hours in labor. And I made 4 trips to the birthing center from our apartment in Oklahoma City to all the way to Midwest City, Dill City, it was about a 25-minute drive each way. I went the first time they checked me. I was only, wasn't very dilated, but very early labor. They sent me home, went back a couple more times and was staying stuck at a 3, just wasn't progressing. And the third time that I went in, my midwife even said, it's possible that this just isn't even true labor yet. And I was like, if this is not real labor, I don't want to know what real labor is. because I was having back labor. Baby was sunny side up or stargazer posterior. And I maybe felt 2 or 3 contractions in the front, very early labor. The rest of the time, it was all back labor, and it was hard back labor. So my poor husband was wearing out his hands and arms trying to provide counter pressure on my back during contractions. We didn't know about hip squeezes at that time. Sure wish we did. I think that would have helped a lot. But finally, got to the birthing center the 4th time and was able to get in the water for a little while, and that helped. And then dilated enough to start pushing. And I honestly couldn't even tell you how long I pushed for. It's all kind of a blur, but had a healthy baby, and we were very grateful.
Thank you for
So,
sharing. And, I love hearing that your midwives kept sending you back home. And I think for people listening, they might be a little surprised, right? But
yes, because there was no reason for us to stay there for hours and hours if I wasn't progressing. And they had someone else in labor, and so it was just, we'll just go back home. But being in the car was not fun, as you can imagine.
yes,
Around,
totally.
in labor, when you're having those contractions, it's very hard to get comfortable when you're in the car.
For sure. But great insights for everyone too, because I wish
Yes.
hospitals would do this. Too often, if
Mhm.
you show up, they admit you, but then you're more
Yes.
likely, right, to get more interventions. Because if you're still in that
Yes, and I've
early
seen it
phase,
happen. Mhm.
yeah. So great
Yes.
care that your midwives knew. Let's not do
Mhm.
anything, but just give you the time that you need to get it going. So let's fast forward now
Mhm.
um, to your next birth, right?
Yes.
And you talk about labor doesn't always go the way we predict or plan, but even for the unexpected, it's possible to have a great birth experience. And I know that kind of relates to this birth. So can you take us
Yes.
into that pregnancy preparing and that birth?
So with that pregnancy, we were much more prepared, and we'd been through it before, and was a little more planned. It was kind of like one of those, if it happens, it happens, and it's meant to be. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. We weren't actively trying to prevent getting pregnant, but we weren't actively trying to either. It was just kind of, if it happens, it happens. And so when I got pregnant, it was, we wanted to have care with the midwives again and give birth at the same birthing center. And so I felt like I was very well prepared, and I felt like I, knew all I needed to know going into it. Um, However, when I did start my labor with him, it was dramatically different. And I had been told, I had heard, that no two labors are the same, and just because you had a really long labor with your first, usually subsequent babies are shorter labor, but I really thought it would be shorter but similar to the first. And the first, it was, all back labor, like I said, but it just gradually progressed. And I felt like I could get on top of things. And before each contraction, when I felt it start to build up, I felt like I could start to get on top of it, wrap my mind around it, and deal with it and get through it. With the second labor, with my youngest, it was completely different. My contractions were very sporadic. They never got to be a real consistent pattern until maybe right at the very end. They were, it felt like he was rotating around and around because I would feel some in the front, some in the back, some both, where the contractions wrapped around all the way around. But I could not mentally get on top of it, and didn't, I felt like I was just being hit out of the blue. because I would have a contract, 5 minutes apart. Oh, 2 minutes apart. Oh, now we're back to 6 minutes apart. Oh, now it's 1 minute apart. And it was just not consistent. It was very, very, very different. And I did not recognize that I was going into transition when I did. And my husband did. My husband kept begging me, I think we need to go to the birthing center. I think we need to go to the birthing center. I was like, no, I'm not getting in that car and making round trips back and forth. I'm not going until I know that it's time. And it's not time. I've only been in labor for a short little while. And, at that point, maybe 3 or 4 hours. And I was like, and my contractions are not consistent. So there's nothing that's telling me I've got to go right now. Well, my husband's like, I really think we need to go. So he called the birth center, and one of the midwives was there, but she already had a patient in labor. And my midwife, who I primarily saw, was off for the day, and she was getting her hair done at the beauty salon. And so she wasn't available, and they did not do home births at that time. Their insurance didn't cover it. So they couldn't come to me. And my husband's like, I really think that we should go. And I was like, no, I'm gonna get it in the tub. I'm gonna get in the tub and see if maybe that'll help me relax and get on top of these contractions. So I had him run me a bath. The moment I got in and the moment my belly hit that water, I felt an urge, like, or a lot of pressure, almost like an urge to push. I was like, oh my, okay. So I couldn't get comfortable. And so I ended up telling him, okay, I think we got to do something. So he called the midwife back, and she was like, I can't leave. I've got somebody here in labor, but let me call your midwife and see what, but if you think that you can make it, go ahead and come our way to the birthing center. And so I got dressed, we got in the car. Our 2.5-year-old, fortunately, was being taken care of by my mother-in-law. She drove down. They lived a couple hours away, or hour and a half away at that time. And we had called her as soon as I thought I was in labor so that she could drive down and come take care of my toddler. And so thankfully, she had made it in time. She had just arrived shortly before we left out the door. So she took the toddler with her in her car. And I'm very grateful for that, so that the toddler didn't have to listen to me scream in the car. And because I think that would have been traumatic. So we got in the car, we drove through town, and we even drove past our local hospital, which my husband said he thought about pulling in to the parking lot and just telling me, okay, you're just going to have to give birth here. But he knew that I would be resistant to that and upset about that. And so we thought we could make it. But we got on the highway, I-35 in Oklahoma. And yeah, ended up, I was feeling the urge to push enough that we had to pull over. And we had to pull over on the side of the highway. And my husband called 911 to see if we could get assistance. And a cop pulled up behind us, a police officer, and he parked behind us. He came with his gun drawn. And if you can imagine, he didn't have it drawn, but he had his hand on his gun when
Right.
he got out of his vehicle, and he's walking up to our vehicle. Because Deborah, if you can imagine this poor officer, what he must have been thinking. We are pulled over on the side of the road. We're in a little Toyota Camry, and I'm in the front seat. I don't know why I didn't think to get in the back seat, but I just didn't. I just got in the front passenger seat. So my husband had come around and opened up the passenger door, and I'm screaming. He's leaning into the car, kind of knelt down. And then I have a prosthetic leg. And it's a below the knee prosthetic leg. And I did not want any amniotic fluid, blood, anything else getting on this expensive leg because they're pricey. And I knew that no matter what I did, it wasn't going to clean up completely. So I was like, I need you to take I took my leg off and I gave it to my husband to put in the back seat. So this poor officer is walking up to our vehicle. There's a man knelt down, leaning into a vehicle, listening to this woman scream with a contraction. And then this guy is my husband is taking my leg and putting it in the back seat. I can't even imagine what this officer thought. So he's got his hand on his gun, about to draw it on my husband. And thankfully, my husband saw him, looked up and spotted him coming and was like, my wife's in labor, my wife's in labor.
Right.
And the officer comes up and he's like, he peeks his head in and he sees me. He's like, oh, okay. So my husband said that the guy turned pale, and was like, I'll be right back. Well, he ran to his car and my husband heard him on the radio. I'm where that woman's having her baby. Send backup, send help. He never came back to our car. He never came
Oh
back to our car. He stayed in his car. He waited for his backup and his buddies to take care of it. I think it freaked him out too much.
no. He has a
I don't
story
think
he's
he knew
probably
what to.
telling.
I'm sure he does. Because I kind of felt sorry for the guy because I can only imagine what that looked like and what went through his head. But we ended up in the end, we had 4 police cars, we had 2 fire trucks, we had an ambulance, and my midwife and her nurse daughter, who had just started working with her, arrived just in time to deliver the baby.
Wow.
Yes, and in fact, she had to do an episiotomy for him to be able to go ahead and get out, because for me to push him out, because it just wasn't I wasn't in a good position.
That's what I
And
was going to ask. Did you stay in that front seat?
I
Like,
stayed
how
in that
were
front
you?
seat. I couldn't move. I just
Right.
couldn't even. I just was like, it never occurred to me to get in the back seat, because I was so just in a fog, that fog of
Yes.
war and labor that you get in, that I was like, I need to stay right where I am, and we need to find a way to do this. And so, fortunately, I was very grateful that my midwife showed up. And then after he was born, he was fine, healthy. Um, and so, we also had 2 freelance journalists with cameras that showed up for the news. And so
Oh my
baby
goodness.
is fully out, my midwife places him up on my chest. We wrap him up, and I'm looking at him, and then I see something. I see movement, and I look up, and through the windshield, I see a camera in my face, because
Oh,
there is a freelance journalist, a man, on the hood of my car with a great big giant camera filming this. And I said, cover me up and get that camera off my face. Or
yes.
get that camera off of me, because I was like, oh my gosh, I've just given birth in front of all these strangers, and it felt like half of Oklahoma City, which was witnessed my birth. But it all turned out, thankfully. Baby was healthy, I was fine. We did end up having a police escort to the birthing center, so that baby and I could both get checked out. I could get stitched up, um, and make sure that we were both well and fine. Um, and all ended up being good, but it was a crazy experience. And I use that when I teach childbirth classes now. I use my stubbornness and my inability to rationally realize where I was in labor and that I was actually in transition, and that my husband recognized it and I needed to listen to him, but I thought I knew more because I'm the nurse, right? I'm the nurse. I know better. I'm the one that's given birth before. I've been in labor before. I've got this. I can handle it. I know what I'm doing. I, I always say, you may think you know, but if your husband's telling you, honey, I think it's time, you may need to listen to him because you don't want to make the mistake that I did and end
Yeah.
up in the car.
Well, thank you so much, Tamara, for sharing your story. And part of me just has to ask you, like, as you recount it now and as you think back, if you had to
Mhm.
say two words about how you feel about that, because like there were so many elements to it. What are you feeling as you reflect back?
Two words, I would
Yeah.
say relieved and grateful.
Okay.
Grateful that it all turned out well.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you. And I feel
but
sad to hear about the photographer and that kind of personal violation, but I'm glad you still
yes.
have a positive experience and
Mhm.
memory.
Yeah, well, and we ended up on the news all over Oklahoma, and then the next day we actually had a reporter come out and interview us about it. Um, so it was one of those where I've always my youngest son will be 30 later this year, so he's almost 30. We've always told the story as a happy ending and a positive one, and an adventure and an excitement. It wasn't until I started my doula training about 3 years ago, um, that I really started digging into I had postpartum depression after he was born, and, part of that, I think, though, was due to hormonal birth control that I'd never been on before that, and I think part of that was causing mood swings and some of the depression. But digging into birth story processing and traumatic birth stories, I had never ever considered this traumatic
Right.
or felt traumatized by my birth experience with him. We had always just laughed about it and talked about, it was this crazy, crazy thing that happened. But when I really started digging in with my training, I realized, that there may have been some unprocessed feelings that I hadn't recognized that at that time, I wish I had and dug into those so that I could have dealt with them at that time. Um, but I've never wanted to color that birth experience as, traumatic because I didn't feel traumatized by it.
Right.
But there it was very dramatically different than what I had planned for, what I had wanted, and then having all these strangers around me and being in that such a vulnerable state, I think that that did cause some feelings that I didn't recognize or that I just tried to stuff down because, "Oh, everything turned out great and baby's healthy, it's all fine."
Yeah.
So I think it's very important for women to process their birth, even if it's amazing and awesome and wonderful, just being able to talk about and recognize those feelings that you had through the experience and how you feel about it afterwards, I think is very helpful.
Yes, very helpful. And thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable enough to open up to us about all the different
Absolutely.
aspects that
Mhm.
birth brought. And I'd love to ask you because you've had two incredibly different and amazing experiences. You're a doula, an educator, a
Yeah.
nurse. What would be one tip you want to leave people with that might be preparing for their own experience? And I know it's hard to pick one, right? You have so
Yes.
many lessons to share, but what do you think is something you want to recommend they do in preparation?
Absolutely. My top tip is education. Take childbirth classes, research what classes are available in your area and what type of classes resonate with you, because there's so many different great choices out there. And so you need to find one that fits what type of birth experience you're wanting, um, and find one that gives you information about all of your options, all the choices that you have availability, so that you can decide what is best for you and your situation. And you also need preparation in those classes. Make sure that those classes teach you the phases of labor and all of, everything to expect in labor, and then things that could be unexpected, so that you can kind of start to prepare for whatever. We don't get to choose our labor. And so we get to choose how we respond. And when we're prepared, then we get to make those choices easier than if it's just in the moment and happening. And so I truly believe that childbirth education is critical and important. And a lot of people don't realize that. They just feel like, well, it's birth. People have been doing it for, since the beginning of time. And that's true. But you can have a better experience when you're prepared and fully informed, and you can give informed consent for the type of things that you want for your pregnancy and for your birth and postpartum.
Great tip. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I know that people that are listening are going to want to know, you offer classes, you're a
Yes,
doula.
I
Can you
do.
share a little bit about how people can reach you and what you have available?
Absolutely. So my website is MomRN, it's MOMRN, birthservices.com. The mom comes from, I'm a mom of two, RN. I used to be an RN. And so I had a business called Mom RN for many years. And so when I started my birth business, I just kind of used that name. So Mom RN, birthservices.com. I have all of my information available on the classes that I teach. The classes I teach are through Birth Boot Camp. And so we have a lot of different choices, and I can help you figure out what class is best for the type of birth that you're wanting to have and what fits your needs the best. And I can also be reached on Facebook, Tamara Walker, childbirth educator and doula services. And I would love to connect with your listeners. If anyone is interested in doula care or in childbirth classes, I also offer virtual services. And so if you're outside of my service area in Oklahoma, I do offer virtual options.
Thank you so much. And all of that will be in the show notes. So wherever you're listening, look in the notes and you can easily click over to reach Tamara. And I love Birth Boot Camp. So I just have to give a shout out to your childbirth method. And I feel honored to work with you and so many of the educators as well. So thank
Well,
you so
thank
much.
you.
And thank you to all our listeners. We really appreciate you joining us today. We always love to hear from you. Send us a comment. What, are you taking away from Tamara's experience and great wisdom? And we hope that you'll join us for the next episode of the Orgasmic Birth Podcast. Bye.